So Ian Carroll dropped something spectacular, ladies and gentlemen, as we are trying to dive into all the Epstein files, the millions of documents through the DOJ website. It does become tedious. It does become annoying. So Ian Carroll, who's a fantastic content creator, very well-known researcher, dives into these rabbit holes. I highly recommend checking out his channel, checking out his work, because it reveals a lot of things that many people, even including myself, uh, don't really realize or don't get into. So sources material time to time again. I know a lot of other people have gave him congratulations before, but this is a game changer, ladies and gentlemen. This is a really amazing game changer that just got released here. So this guy, Jamie Miner, pointed this out. It says, breaking, Ian Carroll dropped a game-changing AI tool that's about to blow the lid off the Epstein files. If you've been digging into the elite networks and corruption, this is your new best friend, Webb, named after journalist Gary Webb. So, for those who don't know, Gary Webb was the famous whistleblower who called out the CIA, who called out the intelligence communities, and then mysteriously self-deleted himself with 2 bullet shots to his head. You can figure that out to realize that that story doesn't line up. 2 bullet shots to the head doesn't sound as convincing of a self-deletion as they were trying to silence him. But I'll leave that for your discretion. So, Webb is an open source research platform at theweb.io designed to decode and analyze over 1.5 million Epstein documents. Its purpose? Make the massive, messy files accessible to everyone, journalists, researchers, and truth seekers, by providing evidence-based answers with direct citations from primary sources. No more endless scrolling through undownloadable PDFs or tabs. How it works, it's like ChatGPT on steroids for investigators. So, this is remarkable, ladies and gentlemen. This is truly remarkable. This is a searchable system that, instead of going through the Department of Justice website, which now they are deleting certain files. If you go and look up the Rothschilds, for example, we know that they are listed in the Epstein files numerous times. And we know now, going through the DOJ website, that those files are being deleted at the same time that they're being released. So they're trying to cover up certain aspects of the documentation that they've already released to the general public, because certain documentation that maybe people haven't gotten to yet reveals a bigger picture than they want people to realize. And I've said this before, the whole Epstein saga, the reason why this is so vital and so important for people to understand, and why I wish more people took an interest and took a mystery or a curiosity into diving into it, is because this exposes a lot more than just Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and his co-conspirators. This reveals a lot of information that people need to wake up. It's the Great Awakening. It's a revelation, and people are now having to do some soul searching and realize that our entire system is corrupt. Our entire system, our way of life, is massively corrupted. We live in a manufactured world. We really don't know what's going on, most of the time, because we're so distracted by little odds and ends and trivial things that doesn't even make sense to the normal average person. And you read something like this, and it's just so revelating. So this is a game changer, ladies and gentlemen. And here is the site here. So I checked it out for myself. If you want to know how to get on to this web application, go follow Ian Carroll. He gives detailed instructions on how to get to this website. And it's just like ChatGPT. It's just like Copilot. It's just like any AI algorithm whatsoever. You go onto this site here, and it gives you this display. And right at the corner here, I made it a bit bigger, but right on the side here is the chat bot. So you can give it questions. You can ask it certain things. So I asked, when I signed up for it, I said, how many Canadians are listed in the Epstein files? And that is a serious question, ladies and gentlemen. That's a serious question, because I when the Epstein Files were first being introduced, and while, there was talk about in the United States, and I was cheering on the fact that this would be released, I was very, very conflicted on the fact that none of our media outlets in this country seem to be concerned about the Epstein Files. And that's kind of shocking, considering the fact that the CBC, CTV, Global, City News, Toronto Star, like the major outlets here, are very prone to be anti-Trump and anti-MAGA and anti-American. So you would think this would be a gold mine for them. You would think this would be the opportunity of a lifetime to expose the Trump administration that, yes, that they are conspiring to cover up billionaires and trillionaires and so on, co-conspirators in this PDF ring. You would think this would be a gold mine for the CBC. You'd think this would be nonstop on all the networks being blasted out to the rest of the country that, hey, our guy that we hated so much, look at this. Well, now, here's why. Here's why the mainstream media in Canada is silent about this, because we're also complicit. So I typed it in, and then the web application says, I'll investigate the presence of Canadians in the Jeffrey Epstein files. Let me start with some broad searches to understand the scope of specific mentions. Now let me search for Canadian individuals. So it goes down step by step. That's interesting. I found that Jeffrey Epstein himself had a Canadian permanent resident card. Excuse me? Jeffrey Epstein, who was convicted of illegal rape of a minor back in, 2007, 2008? In the state of Florida, which Pam Bondi was the attorney general. She covered it up, which explains her, just absolute lunacy when it came to her testimony. She's never going to expose the truth because she's complicit to it. So you're telling me that convicted criminal from the United States was able to go to Canada and get himself a permanent residency card? Huh. Interesting. That doesn't get highlighted in any of the mainstream media outlets. That doesn't get highlighted by CTV, CBC, Global, any of the outlets. Not even Toronto Star, Toronto Sun, National Post. That doesn't get mentioned. Interesting. Very interesting. So it says, now let me search for specific Canadian names, and we'll look at the contact list. So it goes through all the files. This is what's so amazing about this. Like, you don't have to sit there hours and hours on end trying to individually search people in the mass amounts of Epstein files, which I think that may be why the DOJ just released everything at once. Not all the files, obviously, because there's still 3-point-something million documents that are still not being released, and I doubt they're going to release that information because there's more incriminating evidence to back how malicious and awful and disgusting, disparaging this whole entire system really is. But nonetheless, I think the reason why they just released 3 million documents on the DOJ website is because they know that people are distracted. They know that they can easily manipulate people. And they know that people sometimes are not going to have the time to sit down and individually check every single PDF, every single document. So this is what's so groundbreaking about this. So I go further on, and it says, based on my investigation, so this is the application. It says, based on my investigation of the Epstein files, I can provide a detailed analysis of Canadian individuals and connections found in the documents. So under key findings, it says Jeffrey Epstein's own Canadian status. Again, this is after he was convicted in the state of Florida. After he was convicted, after word is starting to break out about Jeffrey Epstein being a PDF. His own connections to Canadian status. The most significant Canadian connection discovered that Jeffrey Epstein himself held a Canadian permanent resident card. In a 2011 email, Epstein wrote, I just found my permanent resident card with Canadian social number. So he had a permanent residency visa, and he also had a SIN number. He also had a social insurance number in Canada. How is that possible? How is that possible? And how is this not being brought to attention by the mainstream media? Well, you're going to see why in a second. Social number valid until June 2012. Do you know if I can work in the United States with that? So that's what Epstein was emailing in Canada. He was emailing an official in Canada if he could continue to work it out with a expired card that was going to expire in 2012. I guess it's better than French passport for the United States. This reveals Epstein had legal residency status in Canada with a valid Canadian social number through at least 2012. Here's another figure, Peter Nygard. Now we know they mentioned this name before, Peter Nygard. The files contain 41 mentions of Peter Nygard, identified as a Canadian citizen who was under investigation by U.S. authorities for involvement in an international sex trafficking ring. The documents state that the U.S. authorities are investigating Peter Nygard, a Canadian citizen, and other co-conspirators involved in an international sex trafficking ring, victimizing adult women and minor girls. Nygard owns Nygard K in the Bahamas and is connected to Prince Andrew through communications. So, here's Canadian travel and context. Epstein had planned to travel to Canada in October 2016, according to passport applications, showing departure dates at 10/20, so October 20th, 2016, and return October 25th, 2016. Phone record shows calls to Toronto from Epstein's accounts in September of 2003. Kevin Over, identified as having both Canadian and French citizenship, communicated about traveling arrangements using his Canadian passport to avoid ESTA visa requirements. So this is how they're trying to get under the radar, even though Jeffrey Epstein is accused of a major crime, a state crime in the state of Florida in West Palm Beach. This is how he's able to get a passport and still get under the radar enough to go and travel into Canada and become a permanent resident. So was Jeffrey Epstein trying to make a run for it? Was he trying to make a run to say, well, if the United States is going to go after me, I can go into Canada. I can go into here. I can go into there. I can go anywhere. And there's rumors now that Jeffrey Epstein not only did not self-delete himself in jail, but he's possibly alive. And I strongly believe that now. I strongly believe it. Because more and more information is being revealed that doesn't align to anything they told us. Anything they told us about Jeffrey Epstein in the past. Nothing aligns to what we're knowing now. And there's also suspicion about bank accounts. Because why would Jeffrey Epstein still have active bank accounts with transactions after his passing? It doesn't make sense. So, lots of things that needs to be explored here. So there's business and financial, and so on and so forth. So, there's a lot of details about this. Here's Mark Carney. This is where it really gets interesting. So, they say that Mark Carney has been in the Epstein Files at least 69 times. But this web app that's going through the Epstein Files confirms it's 78 times. 78 times in the documents. And it says, let me examine the understanding of these mentions. And it goes on and on. And it says, total appearances. According to the entity intelligence system, meaning the web app, Mark Carney appears 78 times across the Epstein document collection. The nature of the appearances, financial market communications. The vast majority of Carney's mentions occur in the financial market updates and communications sent to or from Epstein's network. These are typically discussing the Bank of England policies. So you remember that Mark Carney is the governor of the Bank of England. at the time that this was happening. So this is Epstein communicating with Mark Carney about policies in the UK that almost collapsed the UK economy under him, who is now our prime minister. So this is what makes this so interesting, folks. It doesn't say, like, there's no confirmation that Mark Carney was involved in the PDF SEX trafficking circles, but this does confirm that Mark Carney is complicit in financial crimes, in treason, in getting information from Jeffrey Epstein to conduct policy measures in the UK. Just like how Mark Carney's getting international orders to conduct policies to us Canadians that have nothing to do with Canadians or the public opinions of Canadians. This shows how corrupted our institutions are. So no doubt the mainstream media is trying to cover this up. And as I said here, and I tweeted this, it says, according to a quick search on the web, IO, and that's the application there, Jeffrey Epstein had a permanent Canada resident status and made frequent stops to Toronto hotels. He also obtained a Canadian Social Security number valid until 2012. Shouldn't CSIS Canada be investigating this? You would think. But no. Because you're going to see why later on here. Here's the National Post saying where and how Canada shows up in the Epstein Files. Mark Carney is mentioned 69 times, sort of. So we just confirmed, though, according to the web app that went through all the documents, that's actually 78. So there's more times that Mark Carney has appeared in the documents than mainstream media is picking up. And they are saying, get rid of this, they compromised thousands of Epstein personal emails as well as invoices and receipts. In addition, any tip or allegation forward to the FBI about Epstein, no matter how outlandish and similarity placed within the files, many of the most explosive social media posts and headlines generated from the release have come from the later category, which would include headlines alleging that Epstein was a cannibal, which comes from an alleged allegation made to the FBI that investigators subsequently dismissed. In addition to the window into Epstein's various crimes, the files are also extremely comprehensive record of the elite power networks that Epstein has traversed. So they talk about the Clintons, they talk about Ehud Barak. These are all the people that we already know about. Bill Gates. But here, this is where it gets interesting. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney was mentioned in the Epstein Files within a lengthy e-newsletter sent to Epstein by a group called the American Israeli Cooperative Enterprise. Oh, that sounds like Jeffrey Epstein really was a great Russian asset, right? That's what a KGB member does, right? Gets newsletters and updates on how Israel is trying to influence America and Canadian policies. Talk show host Ben Mulrooney. That's right, Ben Mulrooney, the son of former Prime Minister Brian Mulrooney, is mentioned twice in the Epstein Files. Again, we cannot confirm that they were involved in the actual act of cannibalism or SEX trafficking of minors. But the reason why this is so important is because this information is revealing how corrupted our institutions are. Why Ben Mulrooney is this predominant talk show host, even though I find him the least interesting person in the world. I don't care that you're the former Prime Minister's son. I don't care that you've done E-Talk and Canadian Idol and all these other. He is boring. He is absolutely boring, uninteresting. A rock has more of a personality than Ben Mulrooney, but he's mentioned twice in the files. Go figure. The Irvings, the family famous for their widespread New Brunswick industrial holdings, receives a mention in exchange between Epstein and an unidentified associate. So there's Kenneth Irving. There's the email right there. Mark Carney is mentioned 69 times, sort of. In the last week, it's been common to see social media mentions of how often a predominant figure appears in the Epstein Files. Prime Minister Mark Carney is a good example of how someone's name can appear relatively open in the Epstein Files, with none of the examples being particularly damning. Carney was governor of the Bank of Canada and then the Bank of England during the time period covered by the Epstein Files. As such, Carney's name comes up several dozen times in the newsletters, financial updates, and various spam emails that hit Epstein's various email inboxes. Most of the mentions Carney's name are contained in Financial Market Update, forward to Epstein by his associate Ike Groff. One mention in the emails, for instance, is an email from 2013 containing a list of various financial news stories. One of the links is a column from the Independent headline, "If he wants to turn around the Bank of England supertanker, Mark Carney has a major task ahead." A similar link includes the Telegraph headline, "Let's make the most of clever Mark Carney." So this shows how Mark Carney is complicit. That Mark Carney is not elected to be the superior leader to lead Canada to this victorious stage against Donald. They're all in on it. They're all in on it. That's how Mark Carney was able to become prime minister. Not because he has leadership qualities. It's because he rigged it. And we know that from the primary. We know with what happened with Ruby Dalla. He rigged it, and he got himself selected to become prime minister. And this is why we're in the shambles we're in right now. Amazing how none of this gets mentioned. So here's all the details of Mark Carney being mentioned. Mark Carney at ECNY. Mark Carney, signature luncheon. Mark Carney, governor of the Bank of England, chaired the Financial Stability Board. Mark Carney, governor of the Bank of England. Mark Carney took over as BOE governor September. So you'd think more and more people would be alarmed by this. You would think this would be headlining attention. But of course, they're not going to go after Mark Carney because Mark Carney gives subsidies to the mainstream media to cover this up. And they know that this spans into not just Carney, but other predominant figures. Do you think they're actually going to call out Ben Mulroney? Do you think they're going to call out these individuals and hold them accountable to say, hey, you're in the Epstein Files. Here's what you're sending back and forth. Here's why you're being mentioned. Did you maybe have some answers, maybe held accountable to those things? Again, there's no confirmation of these certain people involved in the SEX trafficking, but it is alarming. It's still alarming nonetheless. Here's Canada Proud saying Mark Carney says he has no knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein or his crimes when he met with Ghislaine Maxwell and his sister's-in-law estate. And we told this before, that Diana Fox, Mark Carney's wife, her sister is married to a British elite who had deep business alliances with Robert Maxwell. And they're all friends. They went to festivals together. There's the famous photo of Mark Carney and Diana Fox Carney hanging with Ghislaine Maxwell. So they know what was happening. They knew what was happening. They knew this was going on. And somehow, still to this day, not a word getting mentioned. Not a word getting mentioned. Here's David Creighton saying Financial Entity 2 disassociating from the torture vid Sultan Mark Carney did deal with in this January this year. Why no corporate or independent media nor opposition reporting on this? Canadian UK finance groups pause new ventures with DP World over CEO's emails with Epstein. So now we're seeing certain companies are not going to align with each other. They're pausing on new ventures because of what's revealed in the Epstein Files. We know that the Sultan I forget his name now, but the Sultan of the I think it was Dubai. That's what I'm remembering there. The Sultan of Dubai was the one that told Epstein about the torture video. And Epstein thanked that Sultan for saying that the torture video was great. So now, all this time that Mark Carney was going around the world trying to, bring new trade alliances, it's blowing back because of the Epstein Files. Now they're stepping back because, we don't want to be associated with someone involved in torture, especially torture of minors. Funny, that never gets mentioned. Here's from the Alberta Separatists, this website. How many times these people are mentioned in the Epstein Files? Mark Carney, 69 times. That should be 78. Justin Trudeau, 27. Pierre Trudeau, 4. Stephen Harper, 4. Brian Mulroney, 4. Chrystia Freeland, 3. Jason Kenney, 1. Melanie Jolie, 1. Mark Miller, 1. Funny, you know who's not mentioned in this? Pierre Poilievre. Isn't that interesting? But yet, he's the most hated person because he doesn't know how things work. He's just a corporate, he's just a career politician. He's never worked in the real world. Funny, they don't mention about Mark Carney's past. They're not investigating where this guy came from, what his connections are. They're not mentioning a word about this. And you'd think that the CBC, the anti-Trump network, would consider all, blasting through this. That they'd be going nonstop because this is the perfect ammo to go against Donald Trump. Oh, wait, they can't do that because Mark Carney is also complicit. They know that Justin Trudeau is complicit. They know that Pierre Trudeau is complicit of this. And guess who else? Galen Weston, the CEO of Loblaws. Galen Weston. See this castle here? This castle that was given to him by the Queen of England. I kid you not. Canada's biggest grocery retailer who sits on the board of Sick Kids Hospital, by the way. Just what a schmuck this guy is. He doesn't know a thing about medicine. He doesn't know a thing. He just got an inheritance and is roaming free. This guy got a castle from the royal family, including Prince Andrew. And here is a letter mentioned in the Epstein Files. I'm not going to read through all of it, but I just want to read this part here where it says, he became a controller and SEX abused me. He was friends with Andrew, the Duke of York, who did the same thing. There are many others who did the same thing. I am tired of the fear. I was approached by MI5 to carry a phone to access a conversation between Epstein and I. I believe either Primark, that's a British, another British business CEO that has department stores across the UK, and Galen Weston Jr. touted the information around. Andrew contacts in ISIS who would be used in France and the UK to carry out terrorist targeting. So why isn't Galen Weston being investigated for this? Why are we so silent here in Canada about Jeffrey Epstein? You ever notice that? No other country likes to mention about this. Right now in the UK, their government is crumbling. But we're not concerned about it. We're not deeply investigated about this. This is why. Because we have perpetrators. We have co-conspirators living among us in this country. It's not just Trump. It's not just Jeffrey Epstein. It's not just Ghislaine Maxwell. It's a whole slew of international scumbags. And you remember, I showed this before, Enrique Lucas, who's a survivor of international trafficking. Enrique Lucas, who was trafficked in the early 70s, got out and wrote a lot of these books about her details to try to warn people and for other people that have been trafficked to give them a sigh of relief that you are not alone, and here's how we can come together and help each other out. And Nick Lucas was on Patrick Bet-David's podcast last year and told just insane details about how this has been going on for decades, how they covered it up, and how she was sold as an XEX slave by David Rockefeller to Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau. So we always thought that Margaret Trudeau was the one that got around. There's that, suspicion about Justin Trudeau being Castro's son because, Margaret got around. But Pierre Trudeau famously went to Belgium multiple times. He always liked Belgium. Why is that? Was it because he wanted to cozy up with the European Union, or was it because there was an underground trafficking circle that Nick Lucas was a part of, that she was sold by the Rockefellers to get Pierre Trudeau to assault this poor child at the time in a incriminating situation that they could take control over the politics and nature of the country of Canada. So here's her describing this to Patrick Bet-David. Take a listen.
It's all about cover-up. It was very, very good. All the investment, all the money goes, not all the money, but it goes a lot to the image.
You gave a couple other names to me earlier. I don't want to say it until you're comfortable. One of the names was another famous politician from the West.
Yeah.
How did you meet him?
He was also there that week.
He was also there that week.
Yeah, Pierre Trudeau.
And what was the interaction with you?
Scary.
Was his wife also involved or just him?
I didn't see his wife, or I don't know. I didn't see anybody else but him.
But you vividly remember him. And when did you know it was him later on? Because at the time you're 9, 10 years old.
Yeah, again, this came much, much later. I don't remember exactly when I realized that it was him.
You don't remember when he came to you later that it was Pierre?
No.
Justin Trudeau's father, right? That's
yes.
who you're talking about.
Yes.
So that's her stating that she was taken by the Rockefellers and sold off to Pierre Trudeau. Now, I know some people are going to look at this and go, well, she doesn't remember everything, so that doesn't prove that Pierre Trudeau was involved in the Trudeau. Like, that should just dismiss everything, right? Well, if you understand how sinister these circles are, and the fact that these are children we're talking about. These are 9 and 10-year-olds, for God's sakes, that get drugged, they get assaulted, they get physically abused. And we know that there's also mind control techniques so that victims like her and many others don't remember these situations. They don't remember the trauma because when they do manage to get out, if they do survive the catastrophic damages that were occurred on them, they can't regain information about these scenarios because it's so traumatic and they use mind control techniques. So this is how damning all this is, ladies and gentlemen. It's so alarming. And this is why it's so important for people to understand this is the revelation. This is the awakening that people should be having on just how fundamentally evil and insane the powers that be are. That your entire philosophy of the world, thinking that there's, left versus right and all this needs to be completely dismissed because you are being taken over by this cult. By this cult of perpetrators. And there's a lot more people that are complicit of it. They may not be involved in actual trafficking of people or actual assault of minors and individuals, but they are complicit in an enormous amount of means, whether it's financially, whether it's covering up, whether it's accessing information. We know that Jeffrey Epstein was a spy, and he was cohorting information from certain countries and giving it to other countries. So we know that these people are involved in high treason, that they're involved in espionage. They're involved in so many things that it really just dawns on people to step back and go, what? Do we even have justice anymore? Do we even have a legal process? If any ordinary individual could even get a percentage of what Jeffrey Epstein was done, they'd be locked away and sent for a death penalty. But because these are higher up figures with ultimate power, nothing's going to get done. Nothing's going to get done. That doesn't mean we can't, we're not going to give up. We're not going to give up. We need to expose who these people are, what they have done, and just how horrific the situation is. And I encourage people, if you haven't checked this book out already, this is what really blew my mind. This is what really started investigating Jeffrey Epstein. Because I didn't really know much about the situation. All I knew that this is a perpetrator in Florida who was arrested at one point for, groping a child. That was as much as I know. Until I saw this book. Until I saw the reports coming out from Whitney Webb, who was a miraculous investigative journalist, a researcher, author, wrote this book, also wrote the second volume, which also goes into more detail about Epstein. But I highly recommend checking out these books because it specifically details how long this has been going, who the connections are. Even if you listen to her interviews, even if you listen to Whitney Webb's interviews, it's miraculous how she can recount all the perpetrators going decades back because of how much groundbreaking research she has done, and just able to regale all this information revealed to the general public. And now that we're seeing it for our own eyes, it's now confirming that Whitney Webb was definitely onto something. She was definitely onto something. And there's a reason why you don't see her a lot on mainstream media. There's also a reason why you don't see her on mainstream podcasts. Isn't that kind of interesting? You only see her in a few instances on, independent media, like the actual independent media, but you don't see her on big name podcasts. Joe Rogan mentions about how he would love to have Whitney Webb on, but we still haven't seen an appearance of her. We still haven't seen any contact. Who knows? Who knows? But I highly recommend checking out this book, checking out the details, because, folks, this is so important. This is so vitally important. I can't stress this enough. That even if you don't want to imagine, the sinisterness, the cannibalism, the, preaching to Baal, even I can't even really stomach, the reveling stuff I found. It's so important and so vital because it shows how this group of criminals, these group of sinister mafia men and women of all walks around the earth, foment power and are able to maintain their power through blackmail, deceit, betrayal, and abuse. And it really highlights exactly why our world is operating the way it is. Like, you ever wonder why we have these horrific policies? Why, we have to go through these loopholes and channels? Why, especially during COVID, do all these countries that have different locations, different sovereignty, different laws, they all operate in the same conjecture when it comes to COVID, when it came to Ukraine, when it comes to war, when it comes to this, when it comes to that. Now you know, because they're all in on it. As George Carlin said, the big club, you ain't in it.